Genesis chapter 37. We're going to be starting in verse 18. So what's happened so far in Genesis 37? This is the life of Joseph. Joseph is the youngest of the brothers except for Benjamin. Benjamin's very young. Joseph's kind of young. The rest of Joseph's older brothers are like in the age from their 30s down. So they're all adults, but they're on the younger side of being adults. And we have Joseph gets dreams. The meanings of his dreams is just as obvious to his brothers as it was to him. With all the grain sheaves bowing down, they see it as him saying, oh, you're all going to bow down to me. And if you're the younger brother, definitely saying that to your older brothers is not a way to make a good relationship, but it should be noticed. The relationship was already bad before then. The Bible mentions that Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. Back then, weaving was very difficult, and so making clothes was very difficult. Clothes were expensive, and to spend all that effort for one of your sons, ignoring all the others, they never got any of that growing up their whole time. It caused immense jealousy to the point where they couldn't speak peaceably unto him. And very often, you'll have people that say, don't like you, but they'll still be able to at least say hello, that kind of thing. They may not like you at all. In this case, the relationship is so broken, they can't speak with him. So he has a second dream, which he shares to his family about the sun, moon, and the 11 stars bowing down. This time, Jacob rebukes him, but then apparently is thinking, because it says he kept the matter in mind. He's like, oh, wait, the Lord chose me instead of Esau, the older brother. The Lord chose Isaac instead of Ishmael. Maybe the Lord has a purpose here. So that brings us through the first part, and his brothers are out feeding the flock in Shechem. The Bible mentioned in verse 2 that Joseph was with basically a lot of his other younger brothers, the sons of Adah and Zillah, with the flock. But now Joseph's by himself. Maybe his fathers realized the tension that happened. He's like, oh, I can't have Joseph with them. Things will cool down. It will be fine later. So the rest of the flock is up in Shechem, which is a bunch north. Jacob's way south in Israel. Shechem is central Israel. That's where his brothers are. Jacob sends Joseph to find out how his brothers are doing. And Joseph goes to Shechem. That was the city, the village that Simeon and Levi had destroyed, which shows just how much the Lord has intervened and worked. It's only been a few years since then. And his brothers were able to bring the flock back up there safely without just getting massacred and without others trying to attack them. But anyway, Joseph goes up looking for them. He doesn't find them, but a random person tells them, I heard your brothers say they went to Dothan. So he goes after them to Dothan, and that's where we pick up in Genesis 37, verse 18. So, do I have a volunteer to read Genesis 37, 18 through 20? Go ahead, Steve. So, they see Joseph in the distance. This is brothers. And we know from the next verse, Reuben heard it, that Reuben wasn't there right now. So it's possible this was some of his brothers or all the rest besides Reuben. Regardless, they see Joseph far off, and they've already decided they're going to murder him. Simeon and Levi, they've already murdered people before. This family, Joseph's brothers, are dangerous. And they say, let's just kill him and cast him into a pit so that his body isn't found. And we'll use the excuse that a beast killed him, and we'll see what will happen to his dreams. What's the motivation for this? We know it's jealousy from before, and then specifically we also have verse 11, his brethren envied him. There's two parts, jealousy and envy. They envy his position, they envy possibly what God is doing, but they envy just, I guess, the kind of person he is, and they're jealous of their father's love. And for that specific reason, even though all of them are adults and all of them definitely know better, his brethren have generally agreed to kill Joseph. And then we see Reuben overhears it. This is not going to immediately go this way, and you find out Reuben is not of the same mind as the rest of Joseph's brothers. Any questions or comments here before we go to verses 21 through 24? Okay. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 21 to 24? So I will read it then. We have, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him, that's Joseph, out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come into his brethren, they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. So Reuben overhears what's going to happen, and Reuben immediately intervenes for Joseph's sake. They, from what we see here, were already ready to kill him immediately, and Reuben says, don't shed blood, just throw him into that pit. From the description, the pit was empty, there was no water in it. It seems likely this is one of two things. It was an old well that was dried up, or that it was a sinkhole. Meaning the ground had washed out underneath because there was a stream, the stream had dried up, but there's this hole there, a clay hole where the water used to run. Either way, Reuben, the Bible says, delivered him out of their hand. Simeon and Levi were very dangerous. The rest of Joseph's brothers were apparently in agreement, and Reuben works with them. They agree, okay, we're going to throw Joseph into that pit. So they take his coat of many colors and they throw him into the pit. The Bible says later, at the end of Genesis, when the brothers think they're being paid back for the way they treated Joseph, Reuben said, did I not plead with you, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen. That was either here or it was later. But in one of those cases, Reuben did a lot more than what the Bible records in just this one spot. He was of the direct conviction that he was going to rescue Joseph and he was going to bring Joseph back to his father. And so he set up this chain of circumstances to deceive them. Now, apparently, Reuben leaves for some reason. Probably, remember, they're watching a flock here. Probably something happened and Reuben had to go take care of it. And he's not going to be there when the next chain of events unfold. Any questions or comments here? So, in this passage, it does seem that Reuben is the one showing biblical character and actually interceding and working for Joseph, and the rest of Joseph's brothers are united against him. By the way, I should mention at this point, just in case it's not clear, Benjamin is not here in this entire chain of events. We're talking about Joseph's 10 older brothers, not about Benjamin, his younger brother. Then we will continue with verses 25 through 28. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 25? Go ahead, Tim.
And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bearing spicery, balm, and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brothers, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt.
So, we have here just the statement of how Joseph's brothers view this. Is right after they've thrown Joseph into a pit, they sat down to eat bread. And I don't know if anybody's ever had the experience of doing something seriously wrong in your life where you know it's wrong, you start feeling sick, and it gets very intense. At an addictions recovery ministry I helped with in Oklahoma, there was one person there who previously, before the Lord worked in his heart, had robbed banks. And he said the first bank he robbed, as soon as he got out of the bank, he threw up just because the conviction of guilt is so strong. All that to mention, they're not feeling it. They have an appetite. They're just like, we're going to eat lunch like nothing has happened, right while Joseph's in the pit there. And while they're eating lunch, maybe it's dinner, while they're eating some meal, these Ishmaelites, so also, in this case, Arabic, distant relations, are going down from Gilead, which is in the far north of Israel, with spices, obviously heading to Egypt. And they see the Ishmaelite caravan, and Judah comes up with his, as he sees it, excellent idea, shows where his conscience is, because he says, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Like, look, killing Joseph and lying about it, that wouldn't be good. That's definitely bad. So what's the good solution to this? We'll sell him to slavery and then lie about it. It's the indication his conscience is fine with it, apparently. And he even gives the reason in verse 27, let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. Like, let's not lay hands upon him. Let's not actually hurt him because he's our brother, so we'll just sell him into slavery. It's just a warping. They're determined to do evil already, and they're justifying it. So it's, oh, we're not doing anything directly. This will be fine. And that's his opinion. The rest of his brothers think it's at least a good enough idea. And so before Reuben gets back, the merchantmen pass by. Joseph's brothers get him out of the pit and sell him into slavery. So what else is interesting here? The Bible calls the merchantmen in verse 25 and 27 Ishmaelites. In 28, it calls them both Ishmaelites and Midianites. The other big time you see Midianites in the Bible is with Gideon. And after the Lord delivers Israel and the Midianites are slaughtered, Gideon asks for the earrings that were recovered out of the plunder. The Bible says they gave all the earrings, for the men were Ishmaelites. They wore earrings. So Midian is one of the nations under Ishmael that is around Israel and occasionally gives them problems. In this case, it's just this random caravans going through to Egypt. His brothers see the opportunity, so they sell Joseph as a slave. It's the type of thing that you have 11 brothers in agreement here. 10 brothers in agreement because Reuben's not there, which actually would mean 9 brothers in agreement. You have 9 brothers, Reuben and Benjamin and Joseph. So 9 brothers are in agreement for this. It shows just the kind of family that Jacob had, all the tensions that are here, and it shows very much how the Lord worked in preparing a people that he would deliver from Egypt in the next couple hundred years. Any questions or comments on these verses before we continue? Yes.
I just see the bitterness in their hearts. It's been there for so many years since he was just a young lad. That bitterness just grows and grows. Here they're plotting to kill their brother, and then they have no compassion. Like you said, they sat down to eat. It wasn't taken off. And then when they see an opportunity, they take that opportunity without second thought. They decide this is what we should do. So bitterness has just led through their life and blinded their eyes to any type of compassion that they let.
And that is a very good point for those listening online, that the bitterness that Joseph's brothers had was just blinding them to the compassion they should have had for Joseph and was allowing them to commit this sin without their conscience getting in the way. Yes.
I think of all of this, and of course we know the story from the beginning to the end, and we see, like you're saying, these 9 brothers, and you wonder how Jacob engaged them in their attitude and correcting them or not correcting them. and we see their sins, we'll definitely find them out. But we also see other things, especially like in Judah's life and what he does. And like you pointed out, Levi and Simeon and what they did and everything else. But this is the development of the tribe of Israel. You know, man's heart, even in privilege as they were given, how they responded. And we see God's grace to all of them as this story unfolds. And though there's a reckoning day, there's also God's mercy and grace.
Absolutely. I'll try to summarize that for those listening online.
As long as I could, so
that-
you can hear.
There's a coming reckoning for each of them. God's mercy and grace is very evident in how he deals with each case, and it shows even the hostility that's often evidenced with the Lord even giving them a privileged position there. I'll say, using their actions, their wills against others. So that brings us to verses 29 and 30. And we have the indication that Reuben wasn't there and what he does when he finds out. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 29 and 30? Go ahead, Paula.
And behold, Joseph was not in the pit, nor his clothes, and he returned into his brethren, saying, the child is not, and whither shall I go?
So Reuben comes back. He's expecting to find Joseph. Maybe he's like, oh, the first thing that went wrong with the flock, I took that excuse to go and leave them. And I'm going to circle all the way around, come back to the pit while they're not looking because they're just eating lunch. And when I get there, I'm going to deliver Joseph, and that will be that. While he returns, he doesn't find Joseph in the pit, so he tears his clothes. He's extremely grief-stricken for this. He was the one of Joseph's brothers that cared about him. Then he goes back to his brothers. He probably didn't know that they were the reason yet for what had happened. But he says, the child is not, and whither shall I go? He's grieving to his brothers. And we know very much they did not share his grief, but he's grieving to his brothers. And I think of one message I heard that was a very similar situation. The preacher used the analogy, it's like going to the tobacco salesman and saying, I'm so sorry that cigarettes cause cancer. There's no compassion there. They don't care. They have other motivations. But Reuben here was trying to do right, and apparently when he pleaded with them, do not sin against the boy, they wouldn't listen. He couldn't do anything directly, so he came up with, okay, I'll deceive them, and I'll rescue Joseph anyway. Comes up with the idea of throwing Joseph in the pit, and that didn't work. We know part of the reason why it didn't work is it was in the purposes of God, that Joseph go down to Egypt. But we see in this case, Reuben has the right reaction, and we see all the way down in Egypt much later, Reuben still, he holds the responsibility. He said, look, we all did this together. Even though I pleaded with you and you wouldn't listen, all of us were in this together. We're all responsible for what happened to Joseph. So that brings us to this case, and it shows the proper reaction to sin. The proper reaction given here is Reuben, the grief and mourning. And now we see the rest of his brothers. They're not interested in any of that. They're not interested in remorse. They're figuring out how to cover it up. So that brings us to verses 31 to 35. Are there any comments before we go there? No, go ahead, Nancy, if you will read verses 31 to 35.
And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it and said, it is my son's coat, and evil beasts have devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I will go down into the grave with my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him.
So the brothers, they're shepherding a flock. So they're thinking, okay, we need to make it look like a disaster befell Joseph. For those that just arrived, we're in Genesis 37, and we're in Genesis 37, verse 31. So they're shepherding a flock. They're like, oh, we can kill one of our goats here. We can use the blood. We have already taken Joseph's coat. We have that right here. They spread the blood on the coat. They sent the coat back to Jacob, I guess kind of with the idea. We didn't see anybody. We didn't see Joseph around anywhere, but we found this coat. Did anything happen? Kind of with that idea, like pretending ignorance. Joseph didn't know about him because, remember, they weren't even supposed to know that his father had sent Joseph up there unless they had seen Joseph. So they're pretending ignorance. They send the coat back, which is why they asked the father, do you recognize this coat? Like, could anything have happened to Joseph? Because we thought we saw this coat and we were wondering if it was his. And so Jacob believes the deception. And Jacob believes that at this point, Joseph is dead. He makes the logical connection. It was because of a wild animal. And so he starts mourning. In all this situation, Reuben is now showing himself implicitly guilty because he could have explained what actually has happened. He could have stood up. He could have found a situation. He could have worked in this, but he's basically going along with the rest of his brother's lie, although he would not have sold Joseph into slavery given the chance. He's going along with the rest of them now. And so, just like when Reuben saw what happened to Joseph, he tore his clothes. Verse 34, and Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. So now Jacob's in mourning, and the rest of his sons and daughters are trying to comfort him. This is once again an indication, along with Dinah, that Jacob had daughters as well, not just 12 sons. His sons and his daughters are trying to comfort him, and he refuses to be comforted here, continues weeping for Joseph. And we know that God is using this for the preservation of his life, as well as for the lives of his whole family. But at this point, that's not evident. Oftentimes, we only see how God uses tragedy much later in a tragedy, because in the immediate context, all you see is the loss here. And there is no difference between natural tragedy and human sin. God works through both. God's always perfect in what he does. And in this case, Jacob thinks it was natural. His brothers know the truth, and God's still working through it. Then that brings us all the way to verse 36, which we're going to pick up with, Lord willing, next week when we get to Genesis 39. But verse 36 is the one-sentence summary. The Midianites sold him unto Egypt, unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. So that's what happened to Joseph. He got sold to a very important person in Egypt. Now we're going to Judah's family. So that brings us to the backside of our outline, the purposes of Genesis 38. Genesis 38 is emphasizing one part of the ancestors of Jesus Christ, since he's from the line of Judah. And this is specifically explaining how Tamar plays into this part of the purposes of God, and where Perez and Zerah come from. And it shows how God works both to stop wickedness and how God works through wickedness. Both are shown in this chapter. So, before we start the verses, the name Adullam is going to come up a lot, and that was one I had to look up with Adullamite. Adullam was a very important city in Canaan. It was one of the royal cities, meaning there was a king in that city who ruled the areas around. And so any person from Adullam, they're like the top people in this area. And we see in this chapter, Judah has a friend who's an Adullamite. So that's the context there. I was going to say, do I have a volunteer to read the long passage here? Verses 1 through 10 of Genesis 38. Go ahead, Steve. Thank you.
Came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brother and turned to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw their daughter of a certain Canaanite named Yeshua, took her, went down to her. She conceived and bare a son and called his name And she conceived again and bare a son, called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, called his name Shelah. And he was at Shezib when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Judah's firstborn was wicked in the sight of the Lord. The Lord slew him. Judah said to Onan, go unto the brother's wife and marry her, and raise a seed to their brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground, that he should give seed to the brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also.
So we have Judah here. He's going to Adullam, this royal city, because he knew an Adullamite there whose name was Hira. We find out later in the passage they're friends. So he's going there to visit. While he's there, he sees a lady he's interested in, so he marries her. And that's Shua. The Bible mentions a couple of places that Shua is a Canaanite woman. The implication from this passage is Tamar also is. But the Bible doesn't directly say that as far as I'm aware, but there's an implication that she is. So he marries Shua as a Canaanite. They have 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And this is where Tamar enters the story. Judah gets a wife for who is Tamar. So and Tamar are now married, and we see God directly takes it into his own hands to kill It says was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Nobody can guess at the Lord's purposes. One thing that did do, the line of the kings is not through as the firstborn would normally have inherited. Died without any children because the Lord killed him for his wickedness. So Judah says, even before the law, we see the idea of levirate marriage, which is the fancy word for if a brother and a wife are married and the brother dies but there aren't any children, the wife is given his wife to the next oldest brother that they might raise up heirs for the dead brother and his family. And so here, Judah tells Onan, his second oldest, go ahead and marry Tamar. So gives Tamar to Onan, his wife. And Onan, probably knowing the kind of person was, like, that guy was a wicked, disgusting person. I don't want to make sure that he has an heir. He deserved to die childless, probably thinking that type of thoughts, that type of situation. Onan comes up with a way to make sure he doesn't give his brother heirs, which is to make sure that he's not getting Tamar pregnant. So Onan comes up with that perfectly good solution in his mind. But by doing this, he's deliberately choosing not to give his brother any heirs. And we see in the purposes of God, the thing which he did in verse 10, thing which Onan did by not giving any heirs displeased the Lord, so the Lord slew him also. Now there's a deeper part in God's purposes here. He's arranging through whom Judah's heirs would come. But also we see here that even though was a wicked person, the idea of paying him back for his wickedness, the idea of make sure he has no heirs is very displeasing to God. The idea of, in this case, revenge even after he's died. So God deals with that, and Onan dies. So Judah's already lost 2 sons, and I can't even imagine what that would feel as a parent in any circumstance, no matter what the wickedness and so on and so forth is. But we see Judah takes further steps in verses 11 through 14. Any comments before we get to verses 11 through 14? So, do I have a volunteer to read verses 11 through 14? I will read it then. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at my father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, the idea of for he said is this is what he was thinking. This is what he said in his heart. So he tells Tamar, just wait until Shelah is fully grown. For he said, lest peradventure he, Shelah, die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted, and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place by the way to Timnath, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So, we see here, there's an implication, but the Bible never states it. The implication is if Judah hadn't married a Canaanite, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. Don't know what the influence of his wife was on his children and what happened in this family. But Judah makes a request of Tamar, and it makes sense in that culture, although it makes no sense in American culture. But he says, look, remain in my house, I'll provide for you, and you can wait till Shelah's grown, with the idea that once Shelah's grown, you can marry him and he can raise up heirs for you. So Tamar agrees. At the end of verse 11, she went and dwelt in her father's house. And now we see a change of circumstances in verse 12. In process of time, there's a bunch of years there, that a daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. So now Judah's lost a third child, 2 of his sons, 1 of his daughters. Lots of tragedy here. And it says in verse 12, Judah was comforted. So he's finished grieving for that, and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. So it's like he's lost a third child, went through that tragedy and grieving, and now he's determined to have a vacation. So he calls his friend Hira the Adulamite and says, look, can we go up and have a vacation and see my sheep shearers up here, how they're doing? So they're going up on a trip. And Tamar hears of it in verse 13. Thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she may know her father-in-law's weaknesses, but regardless, she's determined to take advantage of this situation with what she sees as right in her own eyes. Thinking at the end of verse 14, she saw that Shelah was grown and she was not given to him to wife. She saw that Judah had broken his promise to her by not letting her marry Shelah. And so she goes up, covered her face, and we see immediately that Judah assumes because of that she's a harlot, so she knows what she's doing. She's dressing that way to try to provoke him. And she took her widow's garments off, because obviously that would be very obvious. I can't imagine. It seems like she's been required to wear widow's garments for several years. So there's definitely a case there. This has definitely affected her deeply. So she covers her face with a veil, wrapped herself. So she's fully clothed, but because she's covered her face, that's why she's dressing in a way to provoke Judah. And that brings us to Judah's response. Judah does have a weakness here. We have verses 15 through 19. Any comments or questions before we get to them? So, it seems very clear from this passage and what played out that Tamar's direct way in which she's manipulating the situation is to get an heir. That seems to be the case, but once again, the Bible doesn't say it. That brings us to, do I have a volunteer to read verses 15 through 19? Go ahead, Andrea.
When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come into thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me, and thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, Wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it to her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood.
So Judah makes what he thinks is the logical conclusion that she's here soliciting men, and he falls. This is an area of his weakness. So he says, look, what can I pay you? And her response is, she asks, what will you pay me? And he says, I'll give you a kid from the flock. Remember, he's a shepherd. He's here. But remember, he's on vacation. So he's not actually with his flock. He's on vacation. He's on a trip. His flock is somewhere else. So he says, I'll send you it. And so she asks for a pledge, like, what will you give me that's of sufficient value that I know you're going to hold you to your promise and send me what you promised? And so she asks as pledge, basically for his jewelry and his staff. The signet being the ring you use to stamp whatever is coming from you, to show it's from you. Asks for his bracelet. Apparently that was the most valuable item he had, and for his staff. And so he gives that as a pledge. And when they're together, she becomes pregnant. That brings us to verse 19. It seems either she knows or is hoping that happened, but she leaves before Judah can fulfill his side of what he thinks is the pledge, and continues to perpetuate the deception. She travels back to Judah's house, and is wearing her clothes just like normal, the garments of mourning. So, any questions here? So, through this situation, we see that out of this, God brings great good, but immediately it's going to cause great difficulty. We also see the biblical principle here. When you make an end of dealing treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with you. Judah has perpetuated great deceit with selling Joseph into slavery and lying about it in this last chapter. And now we see he deceived Tamar regarding not giving Shelah to marry. And now we see the deception coming back against him. He's deceived, and because of that, he falls into sin. And now we'll see the consequences. Verses 20 through 23. Do I have a volunteer to read that? Go ahead, Nancy.
And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend Beth, a Doamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in the place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be ashamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her.
So when Judah, the implication is, finishes this trip, because remember, he has to go out, do what he was going to do. He has to come then back to his own flocks, and he sends through his friend Hiram, who, think about this, Hiram's probably going back to his own city now. They've had their trip together. It's been a great time of relaxation for Judah, but now Hiram's going back, and so he sends the kid with Hiram. So as Hiram travels back to his own city, he's looking for this person. Can't find her because obviously she's not there. So he asks the men around here, where was the harlot who was by the road? And they said there wasn't a harlot by the road. Like, they know there's no person living there in that way. So he goes back to Judah and asks to report the mission was a failure. Like, look, you sent me out and couldn't find anybody. When I asked around, they said there wasn't anybody. So Judah's response is, okay, we're just going to drop the matter like nothing has happened. Let her take it to her. The idea of she can keep those pledges because otherwise, lest we be shamed. Like, if we continue to look and continue to explain, it's going to come out what actually happened, and it's going to be shameful. So he said, look, we're just going to leave that matter like nothing happened. Adullam returns, and we then have verses 24 through 30. I will read that. And it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar thy daughter hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man who these are, am I with child? And she said, Discern, I pray thee, who these are, the signet and bracelets and staff. And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail, that behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This one came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So Tamar shows the pregnancy 3 months afterward. Everybody around realizes that's from immorality. Judah passes his sentence, not realizing what's going to happen, of execution. We're going to burn her. Her response, she realizes how she can turn this, but it says she sent to her father-in-law. She did not do this immediately publicly. She could have made Judah look like an absolute fool publicly for this, and a hypocrite. She instead sends privately the items of the pledge to him, discern who these are, knowing he knows full well those are his. And his response is he admits his wrongdoing publicly. When she sends all of that to him in verse 25, you have verse 26, Judah acknowledged them. He said that he was the owner of them, and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. We see in this case, a lot of the consequences don't get worse than they are, because Judah admits the sin here. He doesn't pursue the matter any further. And he says, look, she was just doing what she did because I broke my promise to give Shelah to her to marry. And Judah's going to provide for Tamar, but it says here he knew her again no more. He doesn't take her as wife, but he does provide for her. And she has twins when she delivers, Perez and Zerah. Perez is named, the Hebrew word means breach, because when Zerah was coming out, Perez got around him, came out first, and so they named him Breach, because the midwife said, This breach be upon you. And Zerah, the name means sunrise. Very appropriate name. Those are the heirs of the house of Judah. Perez first, Zerah second. Not any of his direct Canaanite children. The Lord works in this for his purposes. And through this, we do see that Judah has more character than his brothers, in that although he sinned, when the time came for consequences, he didn't try to cover it up the way it had happened before. He admits his wrongdoing. And we see from he knew her again no more that he repented of it. Any comments? Yes, before we close the study.
This is wonderful presentation for sure. In the full circle of sin, be sure your sins will find you out, and you go all the way back to Jacob, the supplanter, and his preferences and all these kinds of things. And we come to this story, and we see, I heard this morning, oftentimes people who accuse or get extra angry, it is because of their own sin in their own lives.
That is absolutely true. We had Greg Kaminsky mention that we see in this situation, just like as wickedness has been going around in this family and God's been dealing with it, that the people who accuse or get particularly angry at sin, oftentimes it's because they have the sin in their own lives. With that, we will close. And the next chapter focuses a lot more on God's goodness. We see his protection of Joseph. We see his ability to work in that situation. But realize even this chapter, God used it to arrange and to work through the heirs of Judah in a way that would bring forth the Messiah. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord God, we thank you for this chapter, for the testimony of your goodness here, both in protecting Joseph and how you, as was mentioned a couple times, deal with sin much more graciously, but yet you deal with sin. And we pray that we would continue to trust in you and draw closer to you in everything through the rest of today. In Jesus' name, amen.